Welcome. Today, we are going to conduct a deep and thorough analysis of one of the most intense and personal chapters in the entire Quran, Surah Al-Masad. Now, it's a very short chapter, just 5 verses, but believe me, it is absolutely loaded with history, prophecy, and a deeply personal story of family conflict that has resonated for centuries. So let's get right into it and break down exactly what makes this chapter so uniquely significant.
All right, so here's our roadmap for this deep dive. We're going to start with the historical context. You have to understand the drama that sparked this revelation. Then we'll move methodically, verse by verse, really digging into the key figures and the incredibly potent language being used. And finally, we'll pull back to examine the enduring themes and the profound meanings that this chapter holds for us today. Okay, first up, the historical context. To really truly understand this chapter, we have to travel back in time. And look, this isn't just some background information for flavor. The backstory here is absolutely everything. It's the key that unlocks the entire meaning of the surah. Now, our entire analysis today is grounded in a scholarly tafsir, or exegesis. You can think of this as our foundational source document. It provides us with a detailed, granular breakdown of the history, the intricate points of language, and the deeper theological meanings, all of which we'll be carefully exploring together. So, a critical concept in any serious study of the Quran is this term you see here, asbab al-nuzul. It literally means the reasons for revelation. It's the forensic work, really, of understanding the specific events and circumstances on the ground that prompted a particular divine message. And when it comes to Surah Al-Masad, the Asbab al-Nuzul is incredibly precise, dramatic, and well-documented. All right, so picture the scene. Prophet Muhammad has been commanded to take his message public. He goes to the hill of Safa in Mecca and summons all the clans of his tribe, the Quraysh. We're talking about the most influential people in the city. He delivers a very direct, very stark warning of a great punishment. But instead of getting support or even just thoughtful consideration, he's met with open hostility from his own uncle, Abu Lahab. He shouts, "Tabban laka, perish you. Is this why you gathered us?" And right there, in that exact moment, as a direct divine reply to that very curse, this chapter is revealed. It's an immediate, powerful, divine response. So let's be absolutely clear about who this central figure, Abu Lahab, was. It is crucial to understand he wasn't a distant foe or a political rival from another tribe. His given name was Abd al-Uzza ibn Abd al-Muttalib. He was a paternal uncle of the Prophet Muhammad. He was immediate family, a pillar of Meccan society, and yet he became one of the most vehement, hostile, and relentless opponents of the early Islamic message. His title, his kunya, was Abu Lahab, which, as we'll see, is a chillingly fitting name. It means father of flame. Now that name, father of flame, is just so significant, and its meaning reverberates throughout this entire chapter. So what was the origin of this title? Why on earth was this prominent leader in Mecca known by a name like that? Well, the source material tells us that the nickname was probably quite mundane in its origin. It likely just referred to his appearance. He apparently had a bright reddish complexion. But here's where it gets so powerful. With the revelation of this surah, that simple descriptive nickname gets completely recontextualized. It takes on a new, chilling, and sinister meaning. It literally becomes a prophecy, forever linking his identity in this world to his fated punishment in the next. Okay, so now that we have that essential backstory firmly in place, let's dive into the text of the surah itself, starting with those absolutely explosive opening verses. So the surah just explodes into being with this immediate, unequivocal condemnation. It's a divine response that mirrors Abu Lahab's own curse. Perish the 2 hands of Abu Lahab, and perishes he. And then right after that, it goes on to dismantle the very foundations of his worldly power and arrogance. His wealth will not avail him or that which he gained. To really feel the sheer force of this opening, we have to look closely at the very first word, tabbat. It comes from the root tabab, and this word does not mean a minor loss or a simple setback. No, this signifies ultimate, catastrophic ruin. It's a state of complete and utter loss from which there is absolutely no recovery. The verse says, tabat yada, perish his 2 hands, which symbolizes all of his power, his actions, his efforts, and then it confirms, wateb, and perish is he. The repetition is critical. It's not just for poetry. It's to emphasize that this ruin is certain, it is absolute, and it encompasses his entire being. Now let's break down that second part of the verse. Our source text explains that it targets the twin pillars of Abu Lahab's worldly pride. First, you have Maluhu, which is pretty straightforward. His money, his fortune, all his material assets. But then you have the second phrase, ma kasab, or that which he gained. Now, scholars have interpreted this in two primary ways. The first interpretation is that it refers to his non-material assets, his children, especially his sons, who are a source of pride and power in that society, as well as his social status and his political influence. The second interpretation sees ma kasab as referring specifically to the profits and gains that were generated by his wealth. So, here's the crucial point. It actually doesn't matter which interpretation of ma kasab you find more compelling. The overarching theological statement remains the same, and it is powerful. The verse is a definitive declaration that every single form of worldly power, whether it's financial, social, political, or even familial, is rendered completely and utterly useless and impotent when it comes up against divine judgment.
So his power, his wealth, his status, all of it is declared totally worthless. The next verse then gets incredibly specific about what his actual punishment is going to be.
The verse is just stark. It's incredibly direct. He will enter to burn in a fire of blazing flame. There's absolutely no ambiguity here. The punishment is fire. But it's the specific phrasing, the precise Arabic words used here, that contains one of the most stunning rhetorical parallels in the entire Quran. And there it is. Just look at the powerful, chilling wordplay. His name, his identity, Abu Lahab, the father of flame, becomes a perfect mirror of his punishment, a naran data lahab, a fire of blazing flame. His very identity in this life is transformed into the literal instrument of his torment in the next. It's a powerful link between who he was and what he would become. But the condemnation doesn't stop with Abu Lahab. The surah then pivots in the final two verses to include his primary accomplice, his main partner in all of this enmity and persecution, his wife.
So verses 4 and 5 bring his wife, Jamil, into the picture. And notice, she isn't mentioned by her name, but by a truly damning description, the carrier of firewood. And then her punishment is detailed with an equally vivid and humiliating image. Around her neck is a rope of twisted fiber.
So what does this title, the carrier of firewood, actually mean? Well, our source text lays out two main scholarly interpretations, and both of them reveal the sheer depth of her hostility. The first is literal. It suggests she would physically go out, gather thorny branches and firewood, and then sneak out at night to place them in the prophet's path, hoping to injure him. The second interpretation is metaphorical, that she was a carrier of what's known as namima, malicious gossip, slander, and tale-bearing. She would move between people, spreading lies and discord to ignite conflict and hatred, literally adding fuel to the fire of social strife. Either way you look at it, both interpretations underscore her active, willing, and enthusiastic participation in the persecution. Okay, now we have to dissect the description of her punishment, because just like with Abu Lahab, the specific Arabic words here are incredibly significant. The verse says the rope is fi jidha, around her neck. But the word used for neck, jid, is not the common everyday word for neck. As our source material points out, jid is a more poetic term, one that's often used to describe a beautiful neck, a neck that would be adorned with fine jewelry, a symbol of status and wealth. So you have this image of an elegant neck, a place that's meant for adornment, and what is placed upon it. A hablin min masad, a rope of twisted fiber. Masad refers to a coarse, rough, ugly rope made from palm fibers, the kind of thing used for heavy, harsh labor, not for decoration. It's the complete opposite of a beautiful necklace. The imagery here is therefore a direct and absolutely devastating reversal of her worldly status. The source material explains that Jamil was famous for wearing a very lavish, expensive necklace, and she was incredibly proud of it. It was a symbol of her wealth and her high standing. The Quranic imagery says that the very place of her worldly pride, her neck, will in the hereafter be adorned not with jewels but with a coarse rope, a symbol of ultimate humiliation and punishment. It's a perfect parallel degradation to her husband's fate, where all his sources of worldly pride were rendered worthless. All right, so having completed our deep verse-by-verse analysis, let's pull our focus back and really look at the broader theological lessons and the enduring significance of this short but incredibly dense chapter. What are the major takeaways from Surah Al-Masad? So, what are the big lessons here? Well, first, many scholars point to this chapter as a miracle of prophecy. Think about it. The surah definitively prophesied that both Abu Lahab and his wife would die as disbelievers. They lived for years after this was revealed. At any point, they could have simply declared their faith, even insincerely, and in doing so, they could have completely discredited the revelation, but they never did. Second, it's a powerful, timeless statement that worldly means, wealth, status, even family connections, offer zero protection from divine accountability. And third, it stands as a permanent, universal condemnation of those who actively work to harm and persecute the messengers of God. And that's really what makes the explicit naming of Abu Lahab so unique and so important. The Quran very rarely calls out its opponents by name. By doing so here, it elevates him from being just a historical figure into an eternal archetype. He becomes the symbol for anyone, anywhere, who rejects divine truth not from ignorance, but from pure arrogance, and from prioritizing kinship and tribal loyalty over allegiance to God. And this leaves us with a final, very profound question to reflect on. The fact that the prophet's most venomous, most hostile opponent was his own uncle forces us to confront a really difficult theme. What does this surah ultimately teach us about the complex and sometimes deeply conflicting relationship between the ties of blood and one's ultimate allegiance to spiritual truth? It's a question that echoes far, far beyond the sands of 7th century Arabia and remains just as potent today.